Hi there and welcome once again. I appreciate you stopping by. This is Jennifer McGuire. So today I am sharing with you 8 creative ways to use word dies. Now this includes single word dies, sentiment dies, or even alphabet dies. Now I will have 8 different card examples showing the 8 different techniques. And the background on all 8 of these cards uses the same die. So there'll be 8 different techniques with that. So really you're getting 8 word die techniques and 8 background techniques. Now I'm going to go ahead and start by talking about the background because this is a little special and I wanted to share that with you. And then we'll get into the word die techniques. Now if you've watched many of my videos in the past, you'll know that my hobby or my favorite thing to do when I need a little stress relief is to stitch on paper. Well, the other day I came up with this pattern that you see here, and I used a die from Concord and 9th. It's a little heart die that's included in one of their die sets, and I'll show it here. So I used that little heart die and die cut it repeatedly to create this background. When I was done with the stitching, I took a picture of it and sent it to Greg and Angie, who are the owners of Concord and 9th and 2 of my favorite humans. Well, when they saw this, they said, well, what if we created a background die that would create a pattern similar to this? And I was so excited because that meant I could create backgrounds very quickly to do stitching, or you could use the die without stitching. So this is the Concord and 9th Sew and Love die set. You get the die on the right along with that love word die. And I'm going to be using these creatively throughout this video. Please know that I wasn't paid for this, nor will I be. It was just a fun idea that we had together, and I love what Greg and Angie came up with. Along with this die, there are a few other things I'll be using throughout the video, so I wanted to show them to you first. This is the Concord and 9th die release tool. I've used it many times in videos, and many people have asked about it, so I thought I'd mention it here at the beginning. On one end, you have a piercing tool, and on one end, you have a little mini spatula. Both of these are very helpful when you're doing die cutting. Now, the die that I use today can be used for stitching on paper. If you're interested in doing so and don't have any of the supplies, I recommend the Concord and 9th Sew Essentials Kit. Now, this has some of the thread for stitching, the perfect size needles, and some heavyweight cardstock. So if you want to try stitching, I recommend this. However, keep in mind that not all of my cards today have stitching. If you are interested in learning how to stitch on paper, I will link here on the top right and in my description below to some stitching videos that I've done in the past. I'm not going to show that part today, as it's very simple if you've seen those videos in the past. Okay, enough of that chit-chat. Let's get into our cards for today that focus on different ways to use word dies on your cards. Now, my first example is the one that I feel has the most impact on a card, and that is to add shimmer and dimension to your word die cuts. Now, instead of using a word die for this example, I'm actually using alphabet dies to create my own word. I do recommend investing in an alphabet die set so that you can customize or personalize your cards. And this one from Concord and 9th is one that I've used many times before. So I took out the letters for hello, and I'm going to die cut them from black cardstock. Now notice I only have one L die, so I'll have to cut that one extra. Today I'm using my Spellbinders Platinum 6 die cut machine, but any die cut machine would work. Now I'm going to die cut each letter 3 times from black cardstock. The L will have to do 6 times. Now, one thing that I recommend above anything else when using word dies is to stack your die cuts. It makes a huge difference in the end. And I know many of you have tried it in the past and let me know that it really does make a difference. It allows your word to stand out more and not get lost on a background. I like to use Gina K Connect Adhesive and just glue 3 or 4 layers on top of each other. And it really helps to make your letters pop. You can even use scraps for those additional layers. Okay, so once I have my letters all stacked, it's time to add them to our stitched background. I did some basic stitching with that Sew and Love die, and now we're going to add our die cuts on top. Now I put them on top with some liquid adhesive, and I had some tape over it just to hold it in place while it dries. And I'll show you a trick for that later in this video. I trimmed my panel down and then added it to a 4.5-inch square black note card that I made from Hero Art's pitch black cardstock, which is my favorite black cardstock. Okay, now this is where we're really going to make more difference to our die cut letters. This is Tonic Aqua Shimmer pen, and it puts a beautiful shimmer down. So on top of my stacked die cuts, I'm putting lots of the shimmer, which will really catch the light in real life. Once I've covered it with the shimmer, I heat set it so it's dry. And now I'm going over that with glossy accents. This is clear but gives a nice rounded dimension to the top of these letters. So this is my favorite way of doing word or alphabet die cuts. I stack up some die cuts, 3 or 4 tall. Then I put the shimmer, and then I put glossy accents on top. It really looks very impressive, especially in black. This is a great way to add a word die cut to a busy background. Here I didn't want to add any embellishments or anything else to the stitching, and I thought that the shimmer and the shine and the dimension of this technique was a perfect fit. If you've never tried this before, I highly recommend it. It is definitely my favorite way to use a word die on a card. Okay, so now let's do another card where I have a stitched background. This time, my technique is to create a faux metal word die cut. Now to do this, I went ahead and die cut 3 loves from white cardstock. This is the love die that comes with the Sew and Love die set from Concord and 9th. I temporarily adhered it to a piece of scrap paper, and I'm pressing VersaMark ink right on top of that stacked die cut, and then adding gold embossing powder. Now I'll go ahead and heat set this and let it cool. This will be kind of a flat gold shine to it. We're going to build this up so it's nice and smooth and kind of domes over the die cut. So once this is cooled, I'm going to go ahead and press on another layer of VersaMark ink, and then put on another layer of gold embossing powder and heat set that. So we're going to build up, I usually do 3 or 4 layers of embossing powder. Each one gives more dimension and gives a smoother result. And when you're done, it looks like you have a faux metallic accent or faux metal word. So once you peel this off your scrap paper, if there are some rough edges, just go ahead and heat set it again, and it'll smooth everything out perfectly. I'll link here to another video that I've done on turning plain die cuts into faux metal accents. I think it'll be helpful also. Okay, so I'm going to add this to another stitch background that I created. Again, I just did basic stitching. Check out that video if you're interested in seeing it. On the background of this stitch piece, I'm putting some Darice foam adhesive strips just on the outside edge. And I'm adding that to a note card that I created out of Hero Art's plum cardstock. Again, this card is 4.5 by 4.5. I also die cut a bunch of hearts from the Memory Box Bright Hearts die. I looked around my stash for a die that created tiny little hearts that fit perfectly inside of the stitched ones, and this fit the bill. So I glued little white hearts inside of my stitched hearts. Now I have our gold love die cut. I'm putting liquid adhesive on the back of it, and I have a piece of tape that will help me with placement. Now I can pick up the whole word with the piece of tape and lay it down onto the center of our card. And I can kind of move it and get my fingers out of the way as I get it perfectly straight. And then I press that tape down, and that will help to hold it against our stitch background as it dries. Once it's dry, I can peel off that tape. Now on top of that love die cut, I wanted to add a thin sentiment strip. So I dug through my Simon Says Stamp sentiment strips and found one that was perfect and trimmed it down, put liquid adhesive on the back, and I'm placing that right on top of our embossed die cut. These sentiment strips are wonderful because you can easily find what you need, cut it out, and add it to your card. You can even run this through your laminator with foil if you want it to be shiny, but I just left it as is. So here you can see that word die cut that looks like metal. It's super smooth and has great shine to it. And all we did was stack up a few die cuts and add a few layers of gold embossing. You could even do this with specialty embossing powders. There are many of them out there now. Okay, my next word die cut technique is to do ink blending. You can do this to create custom colors, do an ombre look, or as I'm doing today, a rainbow across 3 die cuts. So I'm die cutting love 3 times from white cardstock. Once I've done that, I'm using temporary tape on the back of the negative space to tape each of the love die cuts into their original position. This will just help with the blending. It's easier to blend onto die cuts if they're still in their negative space. Now you could use any inking tools or inks that you may have. I decided to use blending brushes from Picket Fence along with Gina K inks. Again, whatever you have will work for this. But by putting the die cuts into the negative space, you don't have to worry about damaging the die cuts, and you can easily blend across the different pieces. You could even go direct to paper with the ink pad. You could use watercolor, anything you want. The sky's the limit. Now I could leave this as is, but I decided to spray it with a Sukaneko Shimmer Spritz. This will give a nice sparkly look to all of our die cuts. You could skip this, but it really makes a big difference on this simple card. I'll remove the love die cuts from the negative space and save the negative space for another card. Now I die cut additional white love die cuts and glued them to the back of our inked ones for a stacked look. I tell you, I always do that. Okay, now that our word die cuts are ready, let's create that background where I did a repeated pattern using the Concord 9th Sew in Love die. To make sure I get the pattern just right, I'm going ahead and drawing lines right down the center of our die. So this is on the back of the die, and I'm using a pencil so I can remove it easily if I want. I'm just following the pattern to create that X across the center, and then I'll do the same in between those pieces. You really don't have to do this. You could definitely eyeball it, but I like to get things just right, and this was really helpful. Okay, next I have a piece of white cardstock that's 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. I'm using my T-roller to draw a line down the center in both directions. Where these 2 lines cross is the center of our card, so I know I can start there. Okay, so now I'm going to line up the lines on my die with the lines on my card, and this helps me to make sure it's centered on the card, and I'll run that through our die cut machine. After I've run that through, it's time to move the die into a new position and cut again. This time I'm going to do the top of my card, run that through the machine, and then move the die to the bottom of the card and move that to my machine. Again, I'm using the pencil lines on the back of the die to line up with the pencil lines on my paper. Okay, now I'm going to do the corners. So I'm just putting the die to line up with the pattern I already have right on one corner. Now you'll notice that my paper is going to be too big for this because it's at an angle. So I'm just kind of letting it hang outside of the cutting plates, feeding it through just enough to press into that die, and then I can remove my paper and move the die to the other corner. Each time my paper will be hanging out of the die cut machine, but that's okay. We can get it through just enough to cut the corners. Once I'm done, I poked out all the tiny little holes, and then I decided to trim my background down to about 4 by 5 1/4. I'll add this onto a Simon Says Stamp fog note card that I created that is 4 1/4 by 5.5. I put little foam squares on the back of this and added it to our note card. I used the Concord 9th Sending Love stamp set to stamp 2 sentiment strips. One says to you and the other says from me. These will go in between our love die cuts. Now we can assemble our card. I start by gluing the top love die cut down and then the bottom love die cut, making sure that they're the same distance from the top and the bottom of the card. Then I can add the middle love die cut right between the other 2. On the back of our sentiment strips, I'm putting little foam squares. But then on those foam squares, I put some liquid adhesive. That way I can wiggle it around and move it around until it's perfect spot, perfect placement on our card, and then I leave it to dry. So I did that for both of the sentiment strips and our card is done. So in this case, the ink blended word die cuts are the focal point of our card. By adding that shimmer to them, it stands out even more. And by stacking the extra die cuts behind them, they have extra dimension. And keep in mind, you can ink up your word die cuts to perfectly match a stamped background if you wanted. Okay, my next example for creatively using word die cuts on your card is kind of like the gold one that we did before, where we layered layers of gold embossing powder. Well, this time I used specialty embossing powders to create a really smooth dimensional look. Once again, I created a full background using the Concord and 9th Sew and Love circle die. I wanted to have a white frame around this, so I have a piece of white cardstock that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm using a rectangle die that's slightly smaller to cut from the center. This rectangle die is from the Hero Arts Infinity Rectangle die set. This will give me a thin white frame that I can glue right onto our die cut background. I just thought this would give a nice finishing touch, but you could definitely skip it if you wanted to. On the back of this piece, I put lots of little foam squares, and on the outside, I used the Darice foam strips, just so that I had nice, even raised dimension around the outside edges. Once I have all edges covered, I added this to a piece of cardstock that was slightly darker than our die cut piece. That way, a darker color would show through all those tiny little holes. Sorry my head gets in the way there, but sometimes you got to get right above your card to make sure you get everything lined up straight. I again used the memory box die to die cut a bunch of little hearts, and I'm gluing those onto our background pattern just for a little added interest on this simple card. For the die cut word on this card, I used Friend, which happens to be the coordinating die for this Concord and 9th Posie fill-in stamp set. I die cut Friend 3 times from Gina K Coral Reef cardstock, and I glued the 3 die cuts on top of each other for dimension, as I always do. Here I have a strip of cardstock that's just a scrap, and I put some adhesive on it, and I'm putting each of our die cuts onto that. Doesn't matter what order they're in, we're just doing this temporarily. Now I'm going to add embossing powder to the top of this, like we did on the Love die cut earlier. In this case, I'm pressing VersaMark ink over the die cuts very generously, and then I'm adding Judikins Sparkle Embossing Powder. I've used this embossing powder for years. It is the perfect iridescent sparkle, and it's a clear embossing powder, so it just adds sparkle to whatever cardstock you're using. After I heat set that, it has kind of a rough finish because it has glitter in it. It doesn't rub off. However, I wanted it to be smooth and have that smooth domed look. So once it's cool, I added more VersaMark ink, and now I'm putting on top clear embossing powder. Then I'll heat set that, and I'll repeat that process 2 more times. So I have sparkle on the bottom, and then 3 layers of clear embossing on top to make it nice and smooth. There are many specialty embossing powders on the market, and I like to put clear embossing powder on top of it just to give it that added dimension. This has a similar look to my first example where I used the Shimmer pen and glossy accents, but this has more glittery sparkle to it. Okay, so I wanted to get the letter placement just right on this, so here's the trick that I do. I have a piece of tape with the sticky side up, that's that big piece across the middle, and I'm just putting tape on the end so it lays onto my desk nicely. Sorry my head gets in the way, but I want to make sure that that middle strip is lined up with my grid surface. I just find that helps me. Now I'm lining up all of the letters right up on the edge of that tape, and I'm making sure the spacing is right and it lines up with the bottom of our tape strip. So once I have all those letters perfectly positioned upside down, I can put the liquid adhesive on the back of it, and then I can pick up that whole piece of tape and transfer it to our card, making sure that it's centered and straight and all my letters will be perfectly positioned. This is one way to adhere individual letter die cuts to your card. That's what I used for the Hello card earlier. Okay, when I was done, I added another Simon Says stamp sentiment strip right across the top. And here you can see that clear, domed, sparkly shine that we have to each of those letter die cuts. This works great with any word die cut that you may have and makes it stand out against the background of your card. Okay, my next word die cut technique uses the same friend die, but this time we're going to add stamping to our die cuts for just a little bit of interest. Now in this one, let's start with our background first. On the background, I decided to add lots of gems, and I'm using the new Honey Bee Stamps gems. These have adhesive on the back, and look at all the crazy colors it comes in. So many different colors. You can see all the different variety of packs here, all the mix of colors. Then there's the clear pack, there's a white gem pack, black gem pack, iridescent gem pack, everything you could possibly want. And again, the adhesive is on the back. So I thought these were the perfect size for today's card, and I can easily do a rainbow since there are so many different colors available. Okay, this time I'm using the Sew and Love die to hang off the edge of my cardstock, so only part of it will cut. This is a piece of cardstock that is 4 by 5.5. So now I'm going to use the dot pattern that we created with the die to help me with the placement of my little gems. So I just kind of scoop up the gems with the adhesive on the back and put them in place with a craft knife. Notice I did put liquid adhesive down on my cardstock first. The reason I do that is it allows me to move the gems around until I have them just right, and then they'll dry nicely. You definitely do not need to use that liquid adhesive because these are gem stickers. After I have all of my gems in place, it's time to create the letter die cuts. I wanted to stamp on them with some stripes, so I'm using the Altenew Pinstripe stamp set. You could use any kind of stamp to stamp on your letter die cuts. I have Hero Art's pitch black cardstock, and I'm using my MISTI stamping tool to stamp the stripes with VersaMark ink onto the black cardstock. You don't need a stamping tool for this, I just thought it would help. Okay, now it's time to add our clear embossing powder and we'll heat set this. So we'll have a very subtle stripe on our letters. It'll have that raised stripe, the little bit of shine to it, thanks to the heat embossing. I'll end up with a piece that's really big, but that's okay, I can save all the leftovers for another project. I'll die cut Friend from the striped piece, and then I'll die cut it twice more from black cardstock and glue it to the back, so again we have our stacked letters. This time I'm using the negative space of the Friend die cut to get the positioning just right. I'm taping the negative space temporarily onto our card. Now I'm going to put liquid adhesive into the openings of the negative space and then pop our die cuts in place. This is really easy to do and guarantees that you get the positioning just right. I showed a different option earlier. You can try both and see which works for you. Once it's dry, I can carefully remove that negative space and all of our letters will be left behind. Now, since we did our die cutting after we did our heat embossing, I noticed that some of our embossing was kind of flat and didn't have as much shine. So all I'm doing is reheating it up, and that brings the shine and dimension back to the stripes. So here you can see in the light the fun stripes that we have on our Friend die cut. You could do any type of stamping on your word die cuts. We also have the jewel pattern in the background, and then I stamped a sentiment below the word Friend, and that sentiment is from this Concord and 9th stamp set that I've used many, many times. So there is another fun way to give your word die cuts a new look with a bit of stamping. Okay, now it's time for another word die cut technique, and this one is a great way to use up any of your colorful scraps. Now before we do our letters, I wanted to create that background. You see that faux letterpress white background? Let's do that first. Here I have a Spellbinders Embossing Mat. This has a little give to it and is a great way to make an impression on your cardstock with your die. Here I have a large die cut that I cut from Tim Holtz watercolor paper, and I'm putting my die right on top of it. I then will put my embossing plate, which comes with the Spellbinders machine. You can do this technique with any die cut machine you have. You just need to follow the instructions in the manual. And there our die has made an impression in the paper instead of cutting it, which gives a great faux letterpress technique. This particular die works really well for that, and it was a perfect backdrop for our colorful letters. And by the way, I just use watercolor paper because it works great for impressions. Okay, now I have the letters for Miss You. This is the same die set I used earlier. And I'm arranging them but leaving a space for the next S. So I have them all spaced out perfectly. And now I'm going to take my tape and put it right across those die cuts to pick them all up together. Next, I have a piece of copy paper, just really thin paper, and I'm covering it with adhesive. And I have a bunch of cardstock scraps. I keep scraps like this in a drawer because I do this technique often. I just grabbed a bunch of them and I'm going to kind of do a rainbow order, and I'm not making sure all the widths of the strips are the same. I'm just making it random, and I'm covering that entire piece of typing paper. This piece of typing paper or copy paper, whatever you want to call it, is just bigger than the Miss You die cuts that we have. Once I've covered the entire piece, I can trim off the excess and keep those for a future card. Okay, so now we have the Miss You dies, and I'm putting anti-static powder tool in the tape because we really don't need it all to be that sticky, and I don't want to have trouble peeling it off after we die cut. By the way, you can reuse these pieces of tape over and over. So I placed that right onto our stripe piece and ran it through our die cut machine. And there you can see the beautiful striped letters. Now we need to go do that other S. So I'm putting it in place, putting a little piece of tape on top, and then running that through our die cut machine. Now this time I'm going to use the negative space again to help with the placement. So I'm temporarily taping our negative space over our letterpress piece. Now I can put liquid adhesive into the openings and then pop each of our die cuts in place. And you guessed it, I did die cut additional letters and glued them to the back of our colored one so it would have that nice stacked appearance. Okay, so after I've popped in all of our letters into place, into the negative space, we can go ahead and carefully remove the negative space and all of our die cuts will be in the perfect position at the center of our letterpress piece. I added that to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card, and now I decided to put glossy accents on top of our striped letters. You definitely don't need to do this, but I thought the shine would be an added touch to this simple card. You can see the fun stripe look that you get with this technique, and it's a great way to use up scraps. And by the way, if you want to see another video on using scraps for die cutting, I'll link to it up here on the top right. Okay, now it's time for our next word die cut technique. In this case, we're going to create a shadow or a platform for our word die cuts to sit on. Many dies these days come with the word die and then the shadow or outline die, but some dies don't. I have this Hero Arts Share Handmade Kindness die. I wanted to cut the words, but then also have a platform or shadow for it to sit on, but that die is not included. So here's a trick. You just put your die onto white cardstock or whatever color you want, and you trace it lightly with a pencil. Remember that the die is usually slightly bigger than the die cut portion itself. So this will create a perfect shadow when we cut it out. So I'm using my Tim Holtz scissors to cut right along that pencil line, and then we'll erase it when we're done. And we have a little white shadow or platform that we can add our die cuts to later. Okay, now it's time to do this background. On this particular background, I added color behind those little die cut hole openings so that different colors would show through. You can do this with lots of pieces of colored scraps, but I have an easier way. I'm once again going to make an impression of the Concord and 9th Sew and Love die onto white cardstock using my Spellbinders Embossing Mat. Again, you can use this in most die cut machines. You just got to read the instructions for your particular machine. So what's going to happen is because we put that mat in there, this die will make an impression instead of cutting the little holes. Now the reason I did this is I now know where to add color so that it will show through when we add another die cut on top. So right over all of the impressed areas, I'm adding color with my Copic markers, but you could use absolutely any markers or coloring medium you want to here. By doing the impression first, we know exactly where the color goes. Okay, after I added color to all the impressed dots, I die cut a piece. This is 4.5 by 4.5, just white cardstock, and I'm putting liquid adhesive on the back of it. I'm now going to line up the holes with the holes we impressed on our background that we added color to. We can trim off the excess, and there we have different colors peeking through all those tiny holes on our die cut panel. Again, you could cut little scraps to do this and glue them behind there. I just thought this was easier. Off screen, I die cut Share Handmade Kindness 3 times from black cardstock and glued them on top of each other for the stacked look, and then added it to that white shadow that we created. I didn't really like the black, so I went ahead and die cut it once more from blue cardstock and put that on top. Now the cool thing about this stacked die cut is you can see the black on the sides, which adds a really cool effect. And because we traced the die to create that white piece, that white shadow or platform, our die cut Share Handmade Kindness doesn't get lost on the background. It helps it stand out a bit more. Here's a closer look at all that dimension. We have the black peeking out of the sides, the blue with the shimmer on top, and then the shadow behind it that allows it to stand out against the card background. This is a great trick if you have any word dies that you don't have the matching shadow die to go with. Okay, we're in the home stretch. For this example, I show how to create a staircase word die cut. This is great when you want your word die cut to be the focal point of a simple card. Okay, so I die cut Love twice from 5 different colors of cardstock. I'm gluing the 2 of the same color together. So I have 2 orange glued together, 2 pink glued together, and so on. Once those are done, it's time to create that staircase effect. So I'm putting adhesive on the back of the pink, which will be the top. And I'm putting that onto the orange, but it's slightly offset. So it almost looks kind of like a shadow peeking out from the pink. Once that's done, I'll put glue on the back of the orange and add it on top of the yellow so that the yellow slightly peeks out. So each time I'm slightly offsetting it, so I end up with what looks like a rainbow staircase. Now you can do this out of any colors that you want. I just thought rainbow would be the most impactful. So I used the Sew in Love die to cut from white cardstock in the top left corner and added it to a Simon Says Stamp Fog note card. And then I added our staircase die cut. On the top of that, I added a Simon Says Stamp sentiment strip once again. Very simple card, doesn't take long, uses up lots of scraps, but it's very impactful because we use that staircase technique. Okay, so there are 8 ways to use your word dies, but there are many more. You can do die cut inlay, you can do setback die cutting, you can do eclipse die cutting. I'll link to some other word die cut videos below in my description if you want to check those out. Also in my description, I have the supplies that I used today if you are interested. And here are a couple other videos in the middle that you might like. I appreciate you sticking around for this long video. I hope you have a wonderful week and we'll see you again very soon.